Monday the 20th was the last day before the new moon, as recognized in ancient Hellas, the day the Athenians would have set aside for sacrifices to Zeus and Athena as saviors and guardians of the city. But this wasn't the conclusion of the New Year festivities, nor was it the beginning. That came later at Panna Tenaya, the celebration of the birth of the cities. So, how did the ancient Athenians ring in the new year? Karate! Before we get into the topic, I'd like to show off the first submissions of fan art that I got in my Discord server by two talented artists. The first, from Silas Fox, is JoJo-style Aliakai. Absolutely gorgeous. And here, Jack and Quill took up the challenge of gender bending an existing cat girl into a cat boy. Thank you both. Any Safe for Work fan art I get in Discord from now on will show up at the beginning of edited videos. So, if you guys want to draw anything, check it out. This video is the first in my Common Hellenism series, which I'm hoping to be a fairly scholarly exploration of ancient Greek religion, but with a reconstructionist bend. I'll be covering everything from the festival calendar to the gods and mythology to prayer and ritual structure. If there's any topics you particularly want to see, let me know in the comments. Research on projects like this makes me long to gaze back into ancient times. Life was certainly worse in many ways, particularly food scarcity and healthcare, but there was a flow of culture and momentum that we don't have with the distancing religions that dominate our current cultural landscape, at least here in America. There are some places where these ancient rites survive in some ways, but that's a topic for another video. It's nearly impossible to separate religious and civic life in ancient times. Cultural religions didn't even have names, they just were, and for Panna Tenaya in particular, people came from all over the city-state of Ithaca to participate. Dancing, song, new art, new plays and dramas, and games of sport were all considered a part of revering Athena as the leader of the city-state. She was everywhere, and most acts of human joy in these festivals were part of her worship. A sharp contrast to a lot of the stuffy religious services we see in modern Abrahamic traditions, even the more progressive ones that totally encourage folks to get into the singing or speak in unintelligible tongues. That's also a topic for another video. As Walter Burkert notes in the section on festivals in Greek religion, there's a certain air, an oeuvre, that one understands at festival events only through experience. We can attempt to describe what happened, who was honored, what was done, but the rhythm and pulse itself eludes us. We can guess at it from the paintings on the side of amphoras, or tall decorative jars with two handles and slender necks, depicting the festivities themselves as well as the gods and heroes being honored. This can give us an idea of the general attitudes expected as well as the tenor of the festivals themselves. But oh, to be there. In order to talk about the new year and why it usually happened in July, we first need to talk about the Attic festival calendar. The year was divided into 12 lunar months. Hekatambion, Metagetinion, Poetromion, Pionipsion, Malmaterion, Poseideion, Gamalion, Antesterion, Elpabolion, Munikion, Targelion, and Skirophorion. Each was named after the major festival in that month, though Hekatambion's major festival shifted to Panna Tenaya over time, as we'll see later in the video. I'll try to make videos about each of the festivals over the next 2 years, or at least the ones that we have enough evidence to talk about individually. There are a number of festivals that we don't actually know when they were timed, but those aren't the ones I'm going to be talking about today. The festivals marked major civic, religious, and practical events in the calendar. Panna Tenaya itself occurred just after the grain threshing festival, Skira, which we will talk about later during a lull in the agricultural cycle. Hekatambion I itself didn't have a festival attached to it, in part because the ancient Athenians saw their calendar as being composed of whole months and festive cycles rather than specific dates as significant beyond the sacred days of each of the gods within the lunar month. Yeah, Greek reconstruction is complicated because these things went on at the same time. I'll do a video on the lunar month and worship fairly soon when I get enough direct sourcing together to talk about each of the sacred lunar days and the in-home worship that took place on them. To understand the Attic attitude toward the new year, we actually need to go back 2 months to Targelion, because the preparations for Panna Tenaya started then at 2 other religious events called Plinteria and Kalinteria. According to Noel Robertson, in his essay in the collection Worshipping Athena, Athena's Shrines and Festivals, Plinteria started on the 25th of Targelion, but sourcing is difficult when it comes to dates. Some sources put it at the dark of the moon, but that's more likely when the adornment rites happened at Kalinteria. But here's one of the major problems for the modern reconstructionist: we may never know unless more direct evidence surfaces. Yay, Christian hegemony! Anyway, a near featureless piece of wood that was said to have fallen from the sky was housed in the oldest shrine to Athena in the Acropolis. It symbolized the relationship between Athena and Zeus, according to Robertson, for as Zeus looks down from above and is worshipped in an open-air precinct at the highest point, Athena is standing inside the room. Prior to the 4th century, this image was removed, bathed in water from 2 different springs, and the woolen robe draping it was washed at Plinteria. While the robe was being washed, the statue was veiled, and afterward was painted and anointed before being redressed at Calinteria. Inside of the oldest shrine to Athena lies the image named girl in the essay. The young girls who performed the rite were of a similar age to this image, likely prepubescent. According to Herbert William Parke in his seminal work Festivals of the Athenians, after the 4th century the goddess's symbol was escorted by the epheboi, or young men in military training, for this bath. This procession was led by a woman carrying sweetmeats made out of figs in a basket. These were likely an offering to Athena. That night, the procession would return by torchlight, and the Praxiridae, an ancient Athenian aristocratic family, would rewrap and redress the image of the goddess. Parke and Robertson differ on where they believe this procession went. Parke believes it went to the sea, but Robertson asserts that it was actually to the Inachos River, which swelled with an annual flood around that time. Robertson cites Callimachos' 5th hymn, which states that, after mixing his waters with gold and flowers, Inachos will arrive from the mountains bringing Athena her bath, a fine one, from lines 49 through 51. Later, at Panna Tenaya, a new robe would be spun by women chosen from the elite families in Attica. While the statue was down, Athena herself was considered otherwise occupied, and the whole city came to a standstill. Government officials wouldn't meet, and denizens of the city ceased their activities. The cleansing festival, Robertson states, commemorates her birth from Zeus's head after he swallows Metis to prevent the Morlai's prophecy from ousting him from his throne, which I'll go into more detail in a future video. I covered the symbolism of it a bit in the Is Zeus a Predator video, link in the iCard above. It was mirrored in similar cleansing festivals throughout Greece, and is considered to be the oldest of the Athenian festive rites for this reason. Calinteria, according to Parke, has little recorded of its actual activities, but etymologically means the sweeping or washing out, which was done by young women under the direction of the temple priestess. According to Robertson, it likely would have occurred between the 26th and 27th of Targelion, which, remember, would have been 26 to 27 days after the first sliver of the new moon shows its light. This would have been late May or early June, depending on the date of that new moon that year. Parke believes that the ever-burning oil lamp in the temple may have also been cleaned, refilled, and relit during this time. It was sculpted by Callimachos, famous for his metallurgy, and was designated by historians of antiquity as being large enough to hold enough oil to burn continuously for the whole year. Robertson believes that Calinteria may have been a secondary name for the evening redressing rites and that full temple cleaning after Plinteria, or the cleaning may have taken place while the image was bathed. Regardless, the name, Robertson asserts, itself speaks of adornment, which had to happen after the washing. It likely took a day or two for the robe to dry out, hence the later dating and the assertion that Plinteria took place on the dark of the moon. They were 2 halves of the same festival. At the next full moon, in the month of Skiraphoron, the grain threshing festival Skira begins. Robertson claims that Athens was unique in associating Demetra and Athena together at the festival, and for the role that the hero Erechtheus plays in it. Skira is technically the conclusion of another series of harvest-related festivals, so I won't go too deep into it here, and we'll cover it more in depth later when I do a series on the Demetrian rites that start with Demosphorgia. For now, I'm just going to cover how the festival works in relation to Athena leading up to Panna Tenaya. According to Robertson, the festival starts in the Acropolis, with the priest of Helios, the priestess of Athena, and the priest of Poseidon moving in procession towards the Skiron. This is an altar to Zeus Hipotos, or Zeus on high, and offerings of cakes are given at the altar with prayers for sunny weather. This is essential for the long grain threshing work ahead, and even the slightest dampness could ruin the crop. The ancient Greeks honored each of the 4 winds with names, collectively known as the Animoi: Boreas of the north, Zephyr of the west, Notus of the south, and Euros of the east. There were 4 lesser winds as well, which were recognized in the Tower of the Winds in Athens, and these were Kaikias of the northeast, Skiron of the northwest, Apeliotes of the southeast, and Leaps of the southwest. The Farmer's Almanac, according to Robertson, told the farmer to rely on Zephyr or Skiron and to situate his threshing floor accordingly. The grains most likely being threshed were barley, which the ancients primarily relied on for their food. The festival derives from the myths of Erechtheus, the most commonly known of which comes to us from Euripides. Even his name, according to Robertson, was derived from the word to split, rend, or smash, ereko. Erechtheus was said to have sprung from the earth when Athena brushed Hephaestus' seed off her thigh. Yeah, mythology is weird and filled with male deities who have offspring without mothers. Athena adopted him and gave him a special place at her temple, and later, as king, he returns to the farmland to do battle. A virtual threshing, as Robertson puts it, as everywhere in Greece, threshing festivals were personified by violent conflict. His enemy was the wet weather that could ruin the grain, personified by Poseidon's anger. He wins the battle and the crop is safe, but shortly the rain and wet returns and Erechtheos is struck by lightning. Which brings us to the dark of the moon on the last day of Skiraphoron, the night which Athenians would make sacrifices to Zeus and Athena in their epithets as saviors, Zeus Soter and Athena Sotera. All things of the old year were left behind and supplications were made by city officials asking for their favor in the coming year. The next day, Hekatambion I had no special ceremonies. As I mentioned before, the Greeks saw their lives in terms of lunar months, not individual days aside from those sacred to specific gods. On the 7th day of Hekatambion, according to Walter Burkert, 100 oxen were sacrificed to the gods. This is the offering the month gets its name from, though we don't know a ton about it. Following this on the 12th, we see the minor festival of Caronia, which marks the end of the threshing season according to Parke, and likely included a sacrifice to the sign of Kronos near the temple of Zeus. There aren't a lot of records for that either, but he thinks that Kronos once had a place as a grain deity, and only remained as the father of Zeus in later mythology. A festival to Theseus, as the uniter of the city, happened on the 15th and 16th, Sinoikia, as well as to Athena as the united ruler of Attica. During a good chunk of pre-classical history, Attica was divided into smaller communities ruled by different kings. According to Parke, on the 15th, a young ewe was offered by a third of the GaelicNox tribe, described as those who wear the white headbands, to Zeus. The next day, the GaelicNox offered 2 young bullocks to Zeus Phatrios, the unifier of tribes. The Deme, or house of Scambonidae, offered a mature bull to Athena on the same day. Instead of typical festival feasting, the meat was sold raw after the bones and fat reserved for the goddess had been burned. This isn't typical for most festivals, by the way. After the 4th century, according to Parke, an offering to Erene, the goddess of peace, was also added. He speculates that this had a lot to do with the Athenians getting sick of fighting with Sparta and the peace being established for a year, but even once the wars resumed, the practice continued. And now we come to Panna Tenaya, the grandest festival in Athens. It began on Hekatambion 28 and lasted for 3 to 5 days by most estimates. I can't overestimate how insane this festival was. Parke takes almost 15 pages to describe just the games themselves, discounting the dances and other rites described by Robertson. The night before the festival, according to Robertson, 2 girls known as the Arephorai, after a year of living alone and being trained as priestesses, would carry a basket containing mysterious contents from the Acropolis to southeast Athens. The authors Robertson cites describe the objects in the baskets as both phallic and mysterious, and the rite is paired with a myth about 2 basket bearers who were told by Athena not to peer into their baskets. They chose to do so anyhow, and inside they found the baby Erechtheos, along with 2 snakes that scared them off the cliff to their deaths. Don't look in the baskets, I guess, is the moral of that story. They went into a cave and were given something else, also wrapped up, and brought it to the Acropolis. Robertson speculates that they were likely honey cakes, which were offered to attract mice for snakes to devour, as snakes were sacred to both Athena and Zeus. Every 4 years, an even bigger festival called the Grand Panna Tenaya was held, and prices of olive oil made from the sacred olive tree at her temple, along with wild olive boughs, were offered to folks competing in the games. Robertson asserts that the games were said to commemorate the war between the gods and the giants, especially Athena's part in slaying Enceladus. Combat scenes were woven into the robe presented during the later procession as an offering to Athena. According to Parke, a festival rewards tally gives us an idea of the program. The winners of the Rhapsodes competition, which dealt with poets reciting epic poems, were awarded first, followed by singers who played the harp, then singers who played the flute, then the athletic games. Parke lists off 5 standard competitive events: a foot race, pentathlon, wrestling, boxing, and all-in wrestling, which apparently was different from wrestling. There were equestrian events as well, though not a lot is recorded on them. I suggest grabbing the book Festivals of the Athenians if you're really interested in all of the sporting events. He goes into great detail about all of them and the sheer scope of the festivities. The next item listed was the torch race, in which prospective racers ran fire from the altar of Eros in the academy to the site of the sacred sacrifice. The sacrifice and the ensuing feast, of course, being arguably the most important part of the festival to most Athenians. That's over 2 miles and a hell of a steep hill climb there at the end, for the record. The racers had to be in peak physical condition. The sacrifice and feast was kicked off by a procession, which I'll try to describe as best I can in the time I have. It was led by a group of maidens carrying bowls, jugs, and an incense burner, materials for the sacrifice, with the weavers of Athena's robe offering empty-handed at the very front, resting after their work all day. Next came a massive military display of infantry and cavalry, with the older retired men carrying olive bow prizes for the lesser events beside them. Non-citizen Greek men who lived in the city and carried trays of offerings filled with honey cakes and combs, whereas non-citizen Greek women carried jugs of water and wine. Free slaves and non-Greeks carried oak branches in the backs of the procession, and Attic colonies and Attic citizens living outside of Attica were expected to send 1 ox and 1 suit of armor as an offering for the festival. Cows brought from all over the city-state were sacrificed, and after the bones and fat were burned to the goddess, the meat was distributed to the different sections of Attica in proportion to how much they contributed. It was a massive feast. Offerings of song, dance, and festivities continued long into the night and the morning. That was a lot. A question I commonly get in my Discord is, how can Reconstructionists modernize these collective rites in their personal practice? Sacrificing hundreds of cows and distributing them to your city is hardly feasible in the modern day, though I doubt your neighbors would mind if they weren't present to watch the slaughter. We'll start with Plenteria and Kalenteria. The central themes of these rites are cleansing, renewal, and honoring the sacred. Cleaning sacred spaces and the object on them, like the bowl and cup used for cleansing water and libations respectively, while in ritual would be a good way to honor this festival. Launder your altar cloth and dust off your statues and any votive offerings to the gods. If you're in a position where your altar must be hidden, offerings of prayer and cleaning your room or other living spaces could also work well here. For the threshing festival of Skira, the theme here is grain and renewal. Bake a loaf of bread or biscuits and offer a portion to the gods. Make an offering to Zephyr in particular and pray for your local farmers. Thank the gods for the bounty you have access to in the modern day. Maybe even make a trip the same week to a farmer's market, pick some stuff up, and make an offering of a portion to it to Athena and Demetra. If you've got your own food garden, offer some of what comes out of it. The last day of Skiraphoron is a day for release and replenishment. Let go of the pain and regrets from the previous lunar year. Maybe do a special cleansing or ritual bath, and meditate on renewal. Pray to Zeus and Athena for blessings in the coming lunar year, and make offerings and libations in their name, alongside the typical offerings done to Hecate and the ancestors on the day before Numania. For Hecatombion 7, I'm giving an offering of 100 or so olives to Athena, because 100 oxen is just impractical in the modern day. For Caronia, I'm giving offerings of grains and honey to Kronos, thanking him for a successful grain year. Sinokeia, given the theme of unity, would be a great time to try to settle old grudges with folks that you believe would be amicable to such things. Keep safe, mind you. Don't go talk to someone you know is going to be abusive just because it's a holiday. It would also be a good time to connect with family and close friends, maybe even a communal dinner if they're accepting of your beliefs. For Panna Tenaya, this would be the time for artists and musicians to really connect with the muses. Ask for inspiration for new prayers and ritual rites. If you have health goals, this would be a great time to set them and make offerings to the gods. Offerings to Athena in particular for guidance and wisdom and virtue are especially important, as Panna Tenaya started as a birthday party for her before it evolved into so much more. Think about the giants in your life and society and ask the gods for help in slaying them. Most of all, stay safe. Remember that these festivals were an ingrained part of daily life in ancient times, so if you miss a few or all of them, the gods aren't going to get mad at you. Honoring the sacred days can deepen your praxis, but it can also be overwhelming when you're just starting out. Do what is comfortable for you, first and foremost. This is a part of wisdom, after all, and Athena would be proud. Before we get to the wrap-up, I want to announce something. Due to the expense of all the sources I use and the ongoing cost of upkeep for things like my editing software, I've launched a Patreon to help cover my costs. If you've got a bit to spare and want to help me bring these videos into the world, feel free to drop down into the description and check it out. Backers get a number of rewards, ranging from getting my videos a whole day early in the lower tiers, to the option to pick a topic for a monthly bonus vid and a drawing for the $10 and $20 per video patrons. Currently, I've only got 2 patrons in that slot, so if you want a shot at it, you've got a pretty good chance of getting it. Your name will also be in the end card, and from time to time I put up polls asking you all which video I should do next. This topic was chosen in one of those polls. Don't feel obligated to help out if you can't, take care of yourself first, but for those who can, it will help me a lot when it comes to getting my hands on rarer and more expensive research materials. I want to be able to use the best materials I can to bring the best content to all of you. Oh, whew, that was a lot. I primarily tapped 3 sources for this one, but they're cited by a ton of the literature I've found, so I'm fairly confident I've covered the topic as thoroughly as I can on YouTube. Sources are in the description as always. If you're new here and you enjoyed my ramblings, burn the subscribe button on the altar and sound on the notification bell so that all may hear of the coming feast. Drop a comment in the procession if you've learned something, or just want to call me a dirty demon worshiper if that's your speed. You probably haven't seen my video on the topic if you do, though. Special thanks to GaelicNox for their amazing channel art, link in the description to their Twitter and website as always. And special thanks also to my patrons. Your monthly contributions are going to help keep this channel going moving forward, and because of you, I'm eventually going to be able to do deep dives on some topics that are a lot harder to get resources on. You guys are awesome. And remember, we're stronger together.